Il senso religioso o l'esperienza religiosa è innanzitutto un fatto, un fenomeno obiettivo, un fatto reale, non è un'idea. Innanzitutto non è un modo di sentire. Non solo si tratta di un fatto, di un avvenimento, ma del fatto più imponente e più inestirpabile della storia dell'uomo. Più imponente, più vasto, che neanche il fenomeno dell'amore dell'uomo e della donna, che neanche il fenomeno del rapporto tra genitori e figli. Perché il senso religioso è un avvenimento che pone, che afferma o che ricerca l'orizzonte entro il quale acquisti senso anche il rapporto tra l'uomo e la donna, anche il rapporto tra genitori e figli. Perciò è più vasto, perfino di quelli.
Quello che ti serve quando ti serve. Come il piano Easy Smart a canone zero, anziché a 3,90 € al mese. Easy Bank, semplicemente banca.
Dieci racconti di solidarietà e aiuto concreto. Storie ricche d'amore, riscatto, coraggio e cura. Storie di persone che donano e che ispirano a costruire una società inclusiva. Una mano a chi sostiene. Storie.
Quello che ti serve quando ti serve. Nasce Easy Bank, la nuova banca digitale di Intesa San Paolo. Easy Bank, semplicemente banca.
Il senso religioso o l'esperienza religiosa è innanzitutto un fatto, un fenomeno obiettivo, un fatto reale. Non è un'idea. Innanzitutto non è un modo di sentire. Non solo si tratta di un fatto, di un avvenimento, ma del fatto più imponente e più inestirpabile della storia dell'uomo. Più imponente, più vasto, che neanche il fenomeno dell'amore dell'uomo e della donna, che neanche il fenomeno del rapporto tra genitori e figli. Perché il senso religioso è un avvenimento che pone, che afferma o che ricerca l'orizzonte entro il quale acquisti senso anche il rapporto tra l'uomo e la donna, anche il rapporto tra genitori e figli. Perciò è più vasto, perfino di quelli.
Quello che ti serve quando ti serve. Come il piano Easy Smart a canone zero, anziché a 3,90 € al mese. Easy Bank, semplicemente banca.
Dieci racconti di solidarietà e aiuto concreto. storie ricche d'amore, riscatto, coraggio e cura, storie di persone che donano e che ispirano a costruire una società inclusiva. Una mano a chi sostiene. Storie.
Quello che ti serve quando ti serve. Nasce Easy Bank, la nuova banca digitale di Intesa San Paolo. Easy Bank, semplicemente banca.
La civiltà dell'amore, fratelli e sorelle, costruite senza stancarvi mai questa civiltà. Lavorate per questo, pregate per questo, soffrite per questo.
Buongiorno.
Good morning. Welcome to this meeting entitled United Europe, the New Energies of the Old Continent. So, as many events here at the meeting, there is a streaming, broadcast on TV channels, on the web. Why did we organize this meeting? Well, the European elections will take place next year, but our goal is to understand, to know more about social themes, labor, economy. So we invited some guests with different cultural and political visions who could answer our questions on these themes. Before starting, I'd like to introduce our guests. Then there will be a video message by Roberta Metsola, President of the European Parliament, who prepared this video for the meeting. We have with us Raffaele Fitto, Minister for European Affairs, Cohesion Policies and PNRR of the Conservative Party. Then we have Pina Picierno, Vice President of the European Parliament of the PSE Group. Massimiliano Salini, who is a member of the European Parliament of the PPE Group. And Enzo Moavero, Milanesi, who is professor of the European Union law at the Lewis University, but he was also Minister of the Foreign Affairs, of European Affairs, so he has always worked on all the themes concerning Europe. So he's very well placed to be here with us today. So first of all, we have this video message, then Enzo will introduce our topic, and then we will have 3 rounds of questions for our guests in order to create a whole picture of the situation. So I'll start now with the video of the President of the European Parliament, Roberta Metsola. Dear friends of the meeting, this year's title is a positive provocation at a time when the world around us is very unstable and polarized. A war of aggression at the gates of the European Union, a growing drought, the uncontrolled increase of migratory flows, the high cost of living, and the threats to autarkies. We have decided not to be intimidated by all of this, and on the contrary, we want to seize the great opportunity that these historical challenges offer to the European Union, because we know that it's not challenges that define our time, but rather how we will react to them. It is precisely in this context that the meeting, now in its 44th year, has drawn its reason of being from friendship and invites us to reflect on the importance of friendship in human existence. For Father Giussani, friendship means to have something great in common, and the greatest friendship is to share a common destiny. This good, positive destiny to which the human heart aspires in history has taken shape in the project of construction of Europe, in which our countries have decided to put together their potential, their resources, their creativity, their fragility in the diversity and richness of the traditions of our people to create a project of shared prosperity that guaranteed our continent an unprecedented period of uninterrupted peace. But the European Union was also the fruit of a history of personal friendship between the founding fathers, who decided to abandon their historical rivalries between their countries to recognize in the other an opportunity rather than an obstacle or a rival. The European project stems from this project, from the desire to take on the aspirations of the others, and it is up to us and our institutions to translate these aspirations into concrete policies, from cohesion policies to the safeguard of the environment, from economic policies to social policies, from development policy to migration and asylum policy, from industrial policy to the creation of an artificial intelligence that is at the service of mankind, from energy independence to the European security and defense policy. Yes, because this vision of ours wants to defend human freedom and dignity, and it has to be defended against the enmity that sometimes lurks in the heart of man. And it is in this context that we offer unconditional support by the European Union and its member states to Ukraine, a country that is also fighting to defend our fundamental values and freedoms. Our goal, of course, must be to achieve peace. Peace with freedom, peace with justice, peace with dignity, because true peace cannot be imposed by an aggressor. Last summer, we acknowledged Ukraine's status as a candidate country to join the European Union, and I do hope that negotiations will start as soon as possible. There are so many expressions of solidarity and human friendship in this very region, Emilia-Romagna, hit by the devastating floods of last May. That was a wonderful page of generosity, which I would like to mention with great admiration for the citizens of the affected areas and the work of the civil protection and the Italian authorities. And to them, I wanted to say again, we are on your side. We will help you rebuild, recover, because you are part of Europe. Europe is not made of institutions. It is made of people, and it can be better if we act together. We must show our citizens the tangible benefits of Europe. We must have the courage to go beyond rhetorics and to be honest. Honest about our failures in the past. as well as about our successes, and we have much to be proud of. The European Parliament belongs to the Italians as much as to anyone else. No decisions are taken in Europe without you. Many are taken thanks to you, and many are driven by you. 1 year before the elections in the European Parliament, this is the message I wanted to take to the citizens. Europe is your voice. Thank you, Rimini meeting, for these 45 years of solidarity and friendship. Thank you for helping us building our Europe. Now, let's make it stronger. I wish you all every success.
Allora è un messaggio.
So, well, this is an introductory message, so to speak. But these words really introduce the idea of Europe. We have always been in favor of Europe. We were talking about a Europe of peoples from the Atlantic Sea to the Urals when we started at the time. Like the Gasperi, a few years ago, there was an exhibition here on the origins of Europe where we tackled the actions and interventions by the Gasperi, as well as by the opponents at the time, socialists and the communists, in favor of Europe. So, well, this is not a neutral debate, so to say, but we need to know where we're heading and where we are. So, Enzo, you have the honor and the duty to talk about this. Thank you, Giorgio. Europe has become a difficult topic, even though it is a topic that is very often discussed. A few years ago, people didn't talk so much about Europe, but now everyone talks about Europe. But Europe, and obviously the European Union, which is the concrete form of expression of Europe, doesn't seem to satisfy all of us, because often there are disappointments, there are dispositions, and Giorgio mentioned De Gasperi, Adenauer, Schuman represented countries, Germany and France and Italy, who faced each other as opponents in the world wars. And then they sat all together around a table and started a process of integration. And originally, in the 50s, they were talking without any fear about a European federation. After 70 years, Europe is not a federation. It's not even a confederation, even though we don't have a clear picture of what a confederation is. It is an international organization, very influential, interconnected, but it's not a federation. And this is a big issue, a big problem, because I think you must have seen, and if you haven't, go and see the exhibition on Saint Benedict. And in that exhibition, there is a panel that talks about the rules of the cloisters at the time, and it talks about authority accompanied by a sense of sharing. Europe had, for a long time, an authority that lacked this sharing element, and there wasn't much interest among the public. Then this interest grew, and there is a further desire for sharing. But in the meantime, this authority has taken up a different shape. And I say this with the utmost respect for the institutions where I myself have worked for a long time. So this authority is no longer as strong as it used to be. So Europe has an authority if there are some rules that were democratically adopted. But when we are faced with great challenges in recent and less recent years, Europe falters. Let's go back in time. In the 1970s, the oil shocks changed our reality, the life we knew at the time. There was already a European community, but there was no European reaction. And we still see the consequences of the choices made at national levels. And then more recently, the economic and financial crisis, the action of the European Central Bank, the agreement between the head of states and government obviously led to some solutions that actually saved, and this is a very important aspect, the integrity of the Eurozone. But that took a few years. And then the pandemic came completely unexpected. We're not prepared for it, with the dramatic images of people dying. So the first reaction, once again, was that of the different states. In some countries, for instance, we didn't have the medical devices needed, like face masks. And each country had to fend for themselves. But then Europe did find a solution, also from the economic point of view, but it always takes time. So when we praise the European program Next Generation EU that invested 750,000 billion euros to relaunch the economy after the COVID-19 crisis, well, we talk about less than 1% of the European GDP. We talk about the double of the European budget. So, well, the budget in itself is 1%. With the Next Generation EU, we have 1.8%. But the United States have a federal budget of 25% of their GDP. 25%, 25 times bigger than the European one. And then there was the tragedy of the war in Ukraine. Obviously, Europe takes Ukraine's side to defend the country that had been attacked by Russia, and this is in line with all European values. But is this really a move by the European Union, or were we just following the action of NATO, where, well, there is a different situation, a different structure, including the presence of the United States, of course. So why do we have this problem? Why these decisions are never completely sufficient? I believe, and this is my personal point of view, that one aspect of the problem is what I was talking about at the beginning, that is to say, this structure of the European Union, which is not perfect because it doesn't have its own constitution with a capital C, if we talk about a real charter, or in a way also the structure of an institution. As my friends, members of parliament, know very well, we have a European Parliament with an important legislative role, but it cannot propose any kind of legal act. It's a commission that does that. And there are many debates on this. People talk about this in talk shows as well as in bars and cafes. And we talk about the future majority of the European Parliament, if we are moving toward the right, or if everything will remain the same. But big European decisions are not taken by the European Parliament. That does take important decisions. There is the Commission that looks like a government, but doesn't have the power of a government. For instance, it cannot act on defense and foreign policy, but it has a monopoly in terms of proposal of legal acts. But, well, governments do not work only by means of laws and decrees. So it is a government that is not perfect. And there is the council that represents the states. It's like a second chamber in the federal systems, or is it something more? Well, it is actually something more, because the council is the only legislator in Europe where in fields like budget, fiscal questions, foreign policy, defense policy, that are key themes for the member states. So, in a way, Europe is just a club of states, of countries, many of which are still convinced that in their sovereign policies they can find the right solutions, and they don't seem to understand that the European Union today has nothing to do with the Europe of made up of different countries in the 1960s and 70s. So, well, we would like to see some kind of acceleration now. I believe that in the years of the so-called European Constitution at the beginning of the year 2000, we actually missed an opportunity when that treaty was not approved in referenda in France and in the Netherlands. We talked about a constitution. It wasn't actually a constitution. So I think that the next European Parliament should take in its hand the management of a real constitutional process that can change the treaties deeply, and we then need to decide what Europe wants to be, a federation, a confederation, or even something else. But it has to be something that citizens can recognize. Otherwise, this idea of sharing that Saint Benedict talked about centuries and centuries ago won't be possible. So we will actually jeopardize the democratic heart of Europe. So if we believe in Europe, we'll have to look at this horizon that was already the vision of Adenauer, Schuman, and De Gasperi. So if we don't make a real leap now, we cannot achieve any target. Thank you.
Allora, prendo al volo di rimbalzo.
Well, based on this topic, these remarks introduced by Moavero, I would like to talk about the governance, because we often have an open debate about that, because on the one hand, it's impossible to have an unanimous approach in the government. We see there are many obstacles, many issues, even for a small country. But on the other side, we're kind of afraid to miss the national sovereignty on some specific topics. And as we mentioned, as we said at the beginning, we really would like to have Europe made of people, because if in Palazzo Chigi all affairs of the third sector are protesting to show their reality, when you go to Brussels and you see such a huge buildings made of glass, you're kind of afraid and you cannot see the people there. So the question is, how can we actually achieve a governance that provides an idea of Europe on the one side, but still guaranteeing this idea of the people? So what kind of reforms do we need? Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here with you and take part in this debate. And we had this introduction with this video from the President of the Parliament that has been able to clearly sum up what are the main challenges that we will have to face. I totally agree with what has been said so far, and I'd like to add some further remarks concerning what happened over the last few years, and also concerning what may happen in the next years, because the governance, the topic of governance, if we consider what happened over the last few years, has been approached already. We cannot say we didn't do that. There's been a conference focused on the future of Europe, and in that occasion, we were focusing on the best way to manage and govern Europe. And of course, we know that actually this attempt didn't bring to any kind of actual result, of good results. So it is true that there is an issue with the governance and that different institutions shall tackle this kind of issue in order to provide solutions and in order to provide also some actions to be taken. But there is also the topic concerning what do we think Europe shall do. And what we did over the last few years actually helped us in understanding that. I don't want to have a negative approach on that, but we need to be objective in analyzing some specific issues. So considering, for example, the Ukraine war, we suddenly realized that we are depending from an energy point of view. All our continent is dependent from an energy point of view from these areas. And this is something that is the result of different choices that have been made over the years. And when we decided to bring outside Europe our supply chain, our production of energy, and all a series of mistakes that we made. And all these mistakes shall be the starting point for us to start thinking about this issue, because we cannot have just an emotional approach based on the crisis that we may be facing on a certain moment, so either the pandemic or the Ukrainian war or whatever may happen every day, so the migration issue or foreign policy affairs. So we need to clearly and better define what are the main tasks that shall be carried out at the European level. And at the European level, I think that these tasks shall focus on some main themes for which we shall provide some answers. Let me just make an example. As President Metsola said, she mentioned the topic of Ukraine, which is a candidate country to join European Union, but also Georgia, Moldova, and the Balkans area. So thinking about such a wide Europe for the next few years, it doesn't mean only overcoming an obstacle, but it means also being able to consider the actual financial aspect and the actual model that we wish to achieve for such a wide Europe. So that's the topics. These are the topics on which we shall focus. Otherwise, we just approach a general debate without actually having the tools and the means to actually put into action these ideas. So European institutions shall focus on these topics, these priorities, and we shall ask ourselves some questions and provide some tangible answers. So the topics of defense, foreign affairs, migrations, but also industrial policies. These are the pillars on which we shall provide some answers today in order to make sure that Europe will play a key role with respect to these topics, and avoiding to take care of many other aspects which won't actually involve all the member states and which will provide a solution which won't be the good one. So from this point of view, considering also our experiences over the last few years, I think we will have to work hard in order to build and to create a project which shall be able to consider all these priorities and define a European context which shall be able to be open also to the outside. So basically being able to have a dialogue with all the other global stakeholders. So that's the challenge we shall face. That's the challenge that we will have to face in this specific period in which we are living. Thank you. Pina, Picierno. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a real pleasure for me to be here with you. It's a pleasure to be here. And I'm saying that considering the title of the meeting, because we are here with friends, because we can be enemies in terms of political ideas, but however, we can grow human relationships based on real means. So, and this is true for politics as well. We are facing and we are talking about very stimulating and interesting topics here. And I think that the European Union at the beginning and then the European community now has been considered and defined as a process. And this was the only option, actually, because we were coming from a war that actually broke our continent, that destroyed our continent. And that war was the result of different states that wanted to impose their power. And we couldn't avoid focusing and considering the heritage of the identities of each country, basing the results of that on the intelligence and the willingness of each one of us. But I think that not only each one of us, but each one of you as well is involved and shall be involved. And when we think that our Europe is too weak, our Europe isn't enough, it's too complicated, we shall never forget that this is the result of the destruction which came after that war that broke our continent. And there is a date, 1989, when millions of citizens, in the name of unity, in the name of freedom, and in the name of democracy, decided to get rid of that separation, and they decided to fight for unity. And that date is a very important date because that led the way for the entire process which brought us until this point, that led us to be an open continent where millions of citizens are free to express their faith. They are free to take part in civil life in their continent. Of course, this is not enough. Of course, we still have much to do in order to run the last mile, which will bring us to be an actual unified union, also from a social point of view. And I often repeat that after the founding fathers, after the Eurozone, we need a new European approach, a new European start and beginning in order to actually achieve a real social and united Europe. And the next Europe should be a Europe based on reforms. And as Moavero was saying, these reforms are really needed. They're no longer only useful, but they are actually needed now. And so the reform of the power of the parliament, and the parliament shall have the possibility to have legislation power as well. And the reform of the Commission as well, which shall play a real government role. Because and also the veto right should be reformed, because we need to be able to take important, brave, and efficient decisions. But let me say that reforms are not enough. We mentioned here Alcide de Gasperi, who was very smart when he used to say and explain us how Europe should rely on a real vital soul. Of course, technical solutions are needed, but there is nobody that can live without a soul. So the European soul, I think, is there. I think we saw it in Piazza Maidan in 2014 where hundreds of young people were protesting and showing their ideas with the flags of Europe, and many of them died because of their ideas. We saw that on that fierce resistance of that Georgian woman a few months ago, hanging there, having the European flags in her hands, despite the police fighting against them. against them. So that's the actual and the real soul of Europe. That's the real Europe we shall all rely on and be convinced of in order to provide an answer to all the questions that history is asking us in this moment. I think that in order to approach such a challenging topic, which is the unity within a community of peoples, made of so many people, in order to approach this topic, we need to actually be ready to face a challenge, a complex challenge. We need to decide if we consider this challenge as an issue, as a defect, or something which can enrich us. Today we have 27 member countries in Europe. There are a lot of countries because it means 27 institutional structures with their own heritage, with their own stories, with different languages as well, with huge differences involved. From an historical point of view, someone decided that diversity was no longer an obstacle. Someone decided that diversity between countries was an element on which a unitarian project could have been developed. So the idea of a unitarian project is based on the fact that so many countries had something in common to share, which was, in that case, a desire for peace. But not only, because the fact of starting from the community of coal and steel meant that there were common and shared needs, which were very tangible. Of course, peace was the need that people had as a consequence of war, but the actual economic need, the goal was to achieve some benefits based on the huge challenges which were resulting from the war. So how to face such a complex situation? You may remember the movie The Third Man. Graham Greene is the director, and he also wrote a book, and there is an exceptional character which is played by Orson Welles, and he says at a certain moment, he said, Italians during the Borgia era, over 30 years, they had to face a very difficult period, but they also had Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, and the Renaissance. Swiss people, over 500 years of peace and democracy, they only make the cuckoo clock. So, of course, this is just a quotation from the movie. This is a criminal character that uses this statement just to justify his crimes. I'm not defending, of course, war and terror, but what happened here, and that's a very important element to understand what actually Europe is. Of course, Renaissance was not the result of wars. Renaissance happened because there was a cultural identity behind that, an identity of a people that through the war, despite the war, didn't stop. On the contrary, that people overcame war in order to achieve a goal which made an opportunity, actually, and that specific point, that specific element is the human being. We often say that there's no longer era of ideologies, but that's not the case. The point here is to recover another process, which is the process from which Schuman, Adenauer, and de Gasperi started from in order to create the European process. So starting from the human being in order to achieve a political idea, not the other way around. And that's the difference, the difference between the Ventotene Manifesto and the idea that de Gasperi, Schuman, and Adenauer had. So this manifesto is made in the wrong way, in my opinion. And that's the defect, the issue that we can find also on the way on which the Maastricht Treaty has been designed and developed. which of course was focusing very important topics, but that's the way it's being developed which is wrong, because either you start from the human being and you go towards the political project, or the other way around. So the attempt here is to create unity based on diversity. And that's important to be aware of that. That's important to have clear rules in mind, because saying that the European Parliament should have a legislation power and then providing the European Commission such a power is something crazy from a juridical and political point of view. It's a kind of a contradiction based on fear that the representatives of people are not free enough to have an actual relationship with people. It's a kind of populism, in my opinion. This is a form of fear towards the freedom of people. But in order to make sure that people are free and have freedom, we shall actually design a project which starts from the idea of the free human being. Because people, in their willingness to be represented, sometimes have such aspects to be considered which are at the basis of the representativeness. And as it has already been said this morning from the previous speakers, we need to overcome the logics of the unanimous approach within the Council. It is not the fear for a single country which can have the veto right, but this is the real interest for that diversity and that rich approach and the rich aspect that allow us to accept that the majority, the vote based on majority, could be the good for everybody, also for those that didn't agree with that vote in the moment it was taken, because the decisions of someone taking the responsibility, it's like in a family, becomes becomes something good also for the people that actually didn't agree in the moment in which that decision was taken. I think this is the main starting point also for the reforms of which we've been talking about.
Secondo.
A second topical theme is that of defense. We know that Europe, at the beginning, thought about a common defense policy in spite of the existence of NATO. Then France said no, and over the years this idea seemed to recede in spite of the war in the former Yugoslavia, and now it has become topical again with the war in Ukraine. So there is this fact that we need to understand what the European Union does and what NATO does. Debates where people say we need to have a European defense that can match that of NATO. Well, we are people that work for peace, but since the situation now makes it important for us to dwell on the defense policy, this is what we're doing. So I would like to ask Pina Picierno to express her opinion on this topical theme. This is a very, very topical theme, and well, NATO obviously over the decades experienced a lot of imbalances. Now we are in a completely different situation because the brutal aggression of Russia against Ukraine is an aggression against the integrity of that people, of that nation. But it is an aggression, an attack, and this needs to be reiterated against our rules, the rules that we have decided to adopt together. So, well, I don't have much time, so I'll just say that war, aggression, the aggression by Putin is a war against the 21st century. We are aware of this, the European Union is aware of this, and the United States is aware of this. So in this context, we need to think about the relationship between European Union and NATO. So that's how I would express my view. I don't think we can imagine the defense of the European Union outside the NATO, the Atlantic Alliance, but we cannot think or imagine the future of NATO without an operational, strategic, financial contribution by or from the European Union. We are really called upon by the current situation to take decisions that will be interconnected, more and more interconnected, just like these conflicts are interconnected. We shouldn't think that the next conflicts, armed conflicts or trade conflicts, will be limited to the two shores of the Pacific, because the climate crisis brings about the food crisis. The food crisis brings about the migratory or demographic crisis. Technological development and industrial and trade developments create conflicts at the global level. So regional conflicts are just a reflection of what happens at world's level. So we need to be aware of this. And then there is another great theme that is kept on the background, but we shouldn't forget about it. That is to say, the hegemony, if I can say so, the challenge that the whole world is called upon to face, which is a challenge against our democracies. Because if we look at the autocracies, we realize immediately that they are apparently better equipped to react to the problem of decision-making power, because they don't have to deal with the speed with which decisions need to be taken. Just like democracies do. We voted the ASAP in the European Parliament, and this was our attempt to reply rapidly to this request, respecting the decision-making structures of our countries. So, well, this is why when I hear people talk about rearmament, well, that makes me smile, actually, because these are the same people who then criticize the European Union because it's not relevant enough within NATO. So, dear friends, we need to go beyond these easy polemics. We need to understand how the European Union can respond to the threats that the world creates at this moment, and how we will be able to defend our principles in a world that is growing more and more complex, with ever-changing balances, and balances which are more and more fragile, and we have to reply with great intelligence. Thank you.
Max.
Massimiliano. Yes, obviously the objectives of foreign affairs and policy cannot be pursued with the use of force. So, well, this is not the right way to do so. Having said so, and I think it was necessary to say so, because obviously this is the reason why we cannot accept the aggression of Russia against Ukraine. So once we have cleared the constitutional structure, the position we have adopted in terms of defense policies, well, taking into account the fact that we no longer have ministers of war, but ministers of defense, so that actually expresses that a different culture of defense. But we cannot think that someone who works for peace is not ready to face war. We cannot change a state, a country, into an abstract entity that can't defend itself. You can't tell Ukraine you can't defend yourself at the moment. It's easy to say so if you are not under attack. But since attacks and aggressions happen, we need safeguarding our principles and our military policy as a policy of defense and not a policy of attack. We have to say that defense is more than just a World Conference on Peace. It has some characteristics that are extremely real, technologically advanced, and expensive. So I believe that the relationship between the European Union and the United States within the NATO framework is an opportunity that doesn't go against the strategic autonomy of the European Union, nor that of the United States, as long as that relationship does not limit itself to military policies. NATO is effective in terms of shared defense policies if it is accompanied by a relationship that goes beyond the military sphere. So our idea today, apart from the military theme, we need to understand the other kind of relationships between the United States and Europe. What is our relationship to the United States at the moment? In Camp David, the United States just defined in a very clear way an economic and military agreement with South Korea and Japan, putting together two countries that are not in very good relationships, as everybody knows, as a reaction to the authoritarian regime by Xi Jinping in China. So a little bit like what happened in Europe with Finland and Sweden that decided to become members of NATO, not because of the merits of Ursula von der Leyen, but rather because of what Putin did. He created a fear that was totally unexpected in that area, in that region of Europe. So in the light of these elements, the focal point, if we go back to the Camp David agreement, is to rethink the relationship between the United States and Europe, which is obviously not something we can do without, from every point of view, so that even the military policy doesn't become a way to put aside our strategic autonomy. This is just a part of a relationship which is the only possible relationship that would really make Europe or the European Union independent, because we cannot think that being independent means not having any kind of links or connections. Independence is not based on the absence of connections and links in everyday life as well as in politics. What it is needed is a clear goal. Our economic and military relationship with the United States is based on a cultural basis, and if we do not acknowledge this basis, we create problems in terms of our military and economic relationship. So we need to base our decisions on what kind of links and connections and relationships you want to have, because you cannot avoid having connections and relationships. So once we have decided who wanted to avoid any kind of relationship, well, we saw what the consequences were. And the position that is adopted by France shouldn't, or rather should, make us understand that this is the virus that could attack the whole body of the European Union. It is not a strategic autonomy, an autonomy that is based to be on the fact that you can actually free yourself from any relationship. So this means giving a real meaning to NATO. apart from the budget that is provided to by NATO, we have countries like Germany who can actually increase the money they will allot to the national policies for defense. There are countries that have problems in the from the economic point of view. So there are differences between the different budgets of the different European countries. What we needed to do, if we wanted to understand our role in NATO, we needed to understand what the nature of our relationship to the United States is, and also declaring what role we wanted to have, for instance, in the Mediterranean, and in a way trying to counterbalance a lack caused by the West. And this is what we are doing also with the new government, and this is extremely important for the future of the European Union. Raffaele. This second question is connected to the first one. What does Europe have to do? And the idea of the defense has come back as a very important aspect with the aggression of Ukraine. And, I will just give you an example that seems to have nothing to do with defense. In our first financial decree last year, of 35 billion euros that were freed, 21 were spent to support families and enterprises to pay utility bills. And this is a fact that, well, it's not something random. It is the impact of an international crisis, because wars have an impact on the economy of countries. If we could actually go back in time and understand what the role of NATO is, what the role of Europe is, and in this this means obviously that Europe has to play a role within the framework of NATO. So what is the strategic roadmap that Europe has created to reflect upon the theme of defense? So if we started to ask ourselves why all of a sudden, and it is a provocative question, Finland and Sweden asked to be members of NATO, we understand the meaning and the importance of the aggression against Ukraine and the risks it involves in terms of defense policies. But there are also other issues, and we cannot ignore them. They are all interconnected in our political debate. That is to say, issues concerning our contribution to reinforce defense. So what is the ratio deficit GDP in investments in the industry for defense? Well, these are thorny issues, actually, but you cannot simply answer there are other priorities, because these priorities fall within the general situation and the need to guarantee a certain stability to a continent that has to be able to solve certain issues. And the war in Ukraine shows this very clearly. The safeguard of the sovereign state, the democracy, are fundamental value, and we cannot obviously renounce these values. But we need to create some kind of dynamic where we need to find a solution. It's not enough to say there is a problem. We need to find a solution, and defense can be a way to find a solution in terms of looking at Europe in a more articulated way. And I do agree with Massimiliano on this. The war in Ukraine has reinforced the western side, the eastern side, I'm sorry. But there is another aspect which is that of the south of Europe. We need, in the south of the world, because what is happening in Africa, in Niger at the moment, we can say it's far away, it doesn't concern us, but it is obvious that it is not so, and in the future we will suffer the consequences of what is happening there. So if we want to have a European approach in terms of defense, which is not an approach based on an urgent situation, a reaction that is due to an urgent situation, but it is rather the result of a long reflection, of a vision for the future, then there's the need to create a dynamic of intervention that is completely different because for instance, the topic of immigration is connected to all these questions. Many migratory flows are due to geopolitical actions created to increase these flows, which in turn brings about a series of problems. So that of defense is a central theme in the European action, and it can never be, because of the importance of this phenomenon, something that can be done independently from Europe. Europe needs to start building its own defense policy as part of a dynamic that reinforces the role of Europe within the Atlantic Alliance. So these are the themes on which we need to reflect, to act, and to make some choices, as we were saying before. That is to say, we needed to choose our priorities on which we want to invest. So defense and safety, security actually, are the fundamental elements on which we need to invest. And we're not talking about investments in a very simple way in arms and weapons, but rather investments in research activities, innovation, to create a system that can guarantee a safer future to our citizens. So this is a challenge we are called upon to face. And there is also another aspect, another point of view, that is to say the industrial aspect. These resources will be invested. If we do not invest in these resources, someone else will, and we will lose our competitiveness. So we need to make choices that can be competitive, that can actually make us innovative, because there are many countries that already do that. We just need to avoid any overlapping in Europe and to coordinate everything at European level so that we can play a more substantial role than we do today. So the latest events show us that the wars that we have always looked at were very, very far from us. Now we have a war which is really in Europe, so really near the European Union. So we really need to rethink our role within NATO and the Atlantic Alliance and to be protagonists in this dimension.
Allora, terza e ultima domanda.
Third and last question. As a Fondazione per la Sussidiarietà, we've always been discussing and debating about economics, even criticizing the neoliberalist model for egoism of single people that through an invisible hand will bring a collective benefit, with the doubt that there was no actual hands in that case. Now, well, yesterday we were talking about that with the Minister Giorgetti. Now the European Union here for many years has been discussing about that, because the lack of possibility of relying on state aids was based on the fact that the market is leading the way. So what is, in your opinion, the future model, well, considering also the PNRR, or a review of the idea concerning the debt and the relationship with the states? Because, well, some journalists told me, well, this is something too high. But if you don't go high when you fly on a plane, you won't see anything. So that's my third question for you, and I'd like to start with Massimiliano Salini. There is a news, and you just mentioned it, Giorgio. The news is the awareness of the European Union concerning the heads of states, and the COVID pandemic actually raised the awareness that through a real intervention, an adequate intervention of the institutions, we can actually support were needed because of a very dramatic historical moment, for example, which actually realizes that the market is not enough to provide what needed. So this Darwin approach of economics, where there is the risk of condemning the most fragile people, the weaker people, is actually overcame this idea by the awareness that provides the funds and the money which are actually needed. And as Moavero Milanesi was saying at the beginning, well, the measure of this economic intervention has been described as a huge amount of money, but it is much lower than what happens somewhere else. So the point here is, what is the future model to which we shall aim at? What are the news? What is the new approach that we can adopt? Well, first of all, I would like to overcome the division between state policies or politics or liberal politics, but I would rather focus on the fact that the challenges we are facing right now in our period, or the fact that phenomena like COVID and the pandemics that can completely destroy all the balances, well, this challenge obliges us, is leading us to think that there is the need of an intervention, which may be actually needed or not, but the point is how to intervene. And here there is a huge risk when we talk about Europe and European Union. So the point is how, because the economic intervention to support is something that is sometimes actually needed. But the drama is not in the moment where the institution decides to support and to provide funds. The issue is when the institution is obliging you and telling you how you should use that money. That's the crucial point. The problem, the issue is not deciding to economically support a transition towards a more sustainable development, sustainable industrial model. The issue is when they tell you that you will be funded only if the technologies that you will invest in will be the ones that have been identified by the European Union. So the problem is not when the state intervenes, but when the state imposes its willingness to the freedom of the civil society. And this is not the issue is not when the state provides the money, but when the state obliges you to tell you and tells you how to use that money. And I'd like to remind once again an article of our Constitution, the Article 3 of the Italian Constitution, says that we are all the same, but the second part says that the task of the Italian Republic is to overcome the obstacle that will obstacle the freedom of people and not allowing people to develop. So the goal of the Republic is not to create a perfect society, but to overcome obstacles that will prevent freedom in order to allow citizens to achieve their goals. That's the key point which makes the difference between a model and the other. That's not the point if I give you the money or not, but the point is if I provide you the money, if I support you, do I really trust in your skills or not? Because all the times we didn't trust in the creativity and creativity aspect of the people, we made huge damages in terms of costs and in terms of freedom. This is the issue and the fact that, especially over the last period, the European Commission, and especially thinking about the Vice President of the European Commission, when he decided to put a stake on this aspect, and that's the main defect. And our strength, actually, I think, let's say our task and our responsibility is to make sure that this won't happen again. So the distinction won't be between the presence or not of the institutions within the economic life of the country. This is something that may be needed, as the last few years demonstrated and showed. But the point is to understand if the single state actually trusts and relies on the skill and ability of the human being to use in a correct and proper way that money. Thank you. Let me add a remark, because I don't think that there is a solution which can solve all problems. We talked about the national aids, national supports. Of course, it's been very important, this kind of approach and policy in the moment when we had to face challenges like the pandemics, where the European institutions have been able to understand how needed it was in that moment, their intervention. But this kind of approach may risk to compromise freedom of competition between countries, because not all countries have the same budget, and Italy, for example, may run the risk to support less than Germany or France their companies, their enterprises, and that can create an issue in terms of free competition. So that's why I don't believe in the existence of models which can work for everybody. I rather believe in the actual need of European institutions to rely on all the available tools, both institutional and economic ones, in order to face the different stages that we are living through. So the Next Generation EU or the PNRR are positive examples of these cases. Of course, we know these are exceptions because, unfortunately, from an economical point of view, we have not been properly equipped over the last few decades, and the tax policy represents a real catastrophe from this point of view, with all the differences, of course, that shall be considered for each country, each member country. So what do we need? We need a stability and growth pact on which the Commissioner Gentiloni is working very hard and very well, and this can lead to a further balance, which will allow us and help us overcoming the issues that we had to face in the past, but at the same time to rely on the principle of balance of the public financial situation, because of course we need always to have a balance from this point of view. We deserve a European industrial policy, considering also what's happening in the US and considering the amount of money and public funds that the US are investing in order to support the industrial policy. I really believe that a sovereign fund would be the best way to support the industrial policy. So we need a series of things and tools, and we need to be very proactive and rapid in order to be able to face the topic of inequalities. The topic of inequalities is rather based on two main issues. The first one is an aspect that has been deeply debated in our country. So I'm talking about the theme of the poor labor. And after years of inequalities, it's now the moment to overcome this issue. Next Generation EU and the PNRR are attempt to provide an answer to restart altogether, to overcome, to delete all those inequalities. Again, talking about the poor labor issue, which is, of course, something which is mainly Italian, despite being treated at the European level, and we will all be involved in providing an answer, because we cannot accept that there's still such a poor labor. We cannot accept that there are people very poor despite working very hard, not having an acceptable salary. And then there is another more European topic, because this involves all these member states, which is the topic of the value of the work, of the labor. And this mainly involves the middle class, because the first consequence, and maybe the most challenging one to be dealt with, is the actual weight of and the actual percentage of the middle class, which is becoming lower and lower, almost disappearing. And I'm not just talking about the salary of the middle class, but I'm talking about the social value of this class, and that involves all Europe, but also the United States, because in the United States they are taking important measures also. The Biden government is taking important measures from this point of view, because the loss of value of the middle class means having to face a lack of interest to the changes from all the people and the stakeholders that have always played a key role, a protagonist role within our countries, and the main changes within our continent have been led by this middle class. And this topic, this issue is very serious, and it should be approached very seriously, because I think it's at the bottom and the basis of the crisis that our democracies are facing. If we won't be able to solve this issue by understanding how each one of us will be able to provide further attention and importance to the middle class, we will never be able to succeed.
Io parto da dove ha concluso.
So I will go back to what Minister Giorgetti said yesterday. Sharing is worries, because we seem to have forgotten the Stability Pact. And I say so because if we look at the increase in the public debt, and well, this makes us understand that a dramatic crisis could be used as an opportunity in terms of investments, for instance. And there is a second thought I would like to share with you. If we do not find an agreement on the Stability Pact with its new model, we could go back to the old rules, and this would have great repercussions. And I would like to underline what the President of the Italian government has been doing in the last few months. We talked about the complexity of the system of state aid and the different fiscal structures of European countries to respond to the Inflation Reduction Act in the United States that mobilized an enormous amount of money and could attract great international investments to the detriment of Europe. The European Council in February decided to ease somehow these state aid rules, but this has not the same effect on every country, because if countries don't have the same independent fiscal capacity, well, the effect changes from country to country, and this actually could, in a way, create an imbalance in the European market, single market. So this has become part of the conclusion of the February European Council, which in terms is part of the proposal approved by the European Commission. This is the element of flexibility. We are the beneficiaries of the National Plan of Recovery and Resilience that, apart from 191,000 billions that are the European funds, it also sees 30 billion national funds for the programming period 21-27, and 43 billions from Europe and national resources as well. So what was the result we obtained, which was, as I said, part of the conclusions of the European Council and is part of the Commission's proposal tabled before the summer. That is to say, the possibility to use in a flexible way all these resources. Why? Because the cohesion policy was determined or created in a situation that was completely different. It was before the COVID pandemic, so this is how the whole program was drawn up. And this plan, Recovery and Resilience Plan, was, well, a response response to the COVID situation, but it was decided before the Ukrainian crisis. And so I'm talking about Article 21. This flexibility could lead to a modernization of our country on the one hand, and to the opportunity to use these resources to react to the new needs, because we are really, well, later on this. The energy demand, Repower EU, the new program approved by the Union that gave way to the national plans last year, this month actually, we proposed an amendment of the national plan of resilience and recovery with that includes our own and PRR and our part of the Repower EU program with about 20 billion, and that tackles very important issues in terms of spending capacity, as for instance the energy performance and the aid to families and enterprises, reinforcement of the electrical networks in our country that are fundamental to make our country more competitive in the energy sector. So that is to say, to create a situation where we really can use our resources. So we cannot avoid changing things and leaving everything in the same situation that it was decided upon before in a completely different scenario. So we needed to read the situation. We needed to understand that these very fast changes call for fast responses and reactions. So we needed to be able to be efficient, effective in changing everything from the economic point of view within the dimension of Europe and within the global dimension. So I believe that if we can actually change the rules for state aid in a temporary way, this could be an opportunity that helps our country, and it could be a solution in the short term in order to use better, in an effective way, all these resources. I want to deal with the NPRR in details because we don't have enough time. So we will talk about this at a different time.
Allora, due brevissime riflessioni dopo aver ringraziato I nostri.
Just a couple of thoughts after thanking our guests who actually discussed very important topics. So first of all, we need to believe. If we don't have a belief, there won't be any political action. Nationalism is not the answer to our problems. And so unity in diversity, this is the concept. Our country is born from this idea, as well as the European Constitution that we talked about in the exhibition a few years ago. So we can be different, we can have different situations, but diversity is not an obstacle to unity. And then my second thought, we will be voting for the European Parliament. We needed to know. Knowledge is important. We needed to listen to different people, to look at the different pathways and different solutions, because, and Pope Ratzinger said so, politics is the art of compromise. So the compromise was concluded in 1947 when the Constitution was written. Now we have to believe that different forces that have their own political development can build together some common rules that, in turn, can be a solution to our problems. So we can be united, although different. We can be friends of the United States and stay independent. We can believe in a free market, but create our own common point. So, good work to you all. Thank you.
la civiltà dell'amore. Fratelli e sorelle, costruite senza stancarvi mai questa civiltà. Lavorate per questo, pregate per questo, soffrite per questo.
Il senso religioso o l'esperienza religiosa è innanzitutto un fatto, un fenomeno obiettivo, un fatto reale, non è un'idea, innanzitutto non è un modo di sentire, non solo si tratta di un fatto, di un avvenimento, ma del fatto più imponente e più inestirpabile della storia dell'uomo. Più imponente, più vasto, che neanche il fenomeno dell'amore dell'uomo e della donna, che neanche il fenomeno del rapporto tra genitori e figli. Perché il senso religioso è un avvenimento che pone, che afferma o che ricerca l'orizzonte entro il quale acquisti senso anche il rapporto tra l'uomo e la donna, anche il rapporto tra genitori e figli. Perciò è più vasto, perfino di quelli.
Quello che ti serve quando ti serve. Come il piano Easy Smart a canone zero, anziché a 3,90 € al mese. Easy Bank, semplicemente banca.
Dieci racconti di solidarietà e aiuto concreto. Storie ricche d'amore, riscatto, coraggio e cura. Storie di persone che donano e che ispirano a costruire una società inclusiva. Una mano a chi sostiene. Storie.
Quello che ti serve quando ti serve. Nasce Easy Bank, la nuova banca digitale di Intesa San Paolo. Easy Bank, semplicemente banca.